The first night I realized someone had pitched tents on my land, I was standing alone in the dark, with the smell of wet soil in my nose and a knot in my chest that told me this wasn't going to end quietly. The frogs had gone silent. Even the cows down by the south fence were restless, shifting their weight, lowing like they sensed what I didn't yet fully understand. Then I saw the flicker of lantern light where there should have been nothing but ryegrass and moonshine dew, and my stomach dropped. That land had been in my family longer than the town itself. No signs, no permission, just strangers sleeping where my father taught me to walk straight lines behind a plow. And in that moment I made myself a promise I didn't say out loud. They were going to regret choosing my farm. I didn't rush down there. That's the thing people get wrong about revenge. They think it's fast, explosive, loud. Real revenge is patient. It listens. I stood by the fence and watched. There were maybe a dozen tents, all neatly lined up like some kind of outdoor brochure. SUVs parked in a row, shiny, expensive, completely out of place in the mud. I recognized the decals right away. HOA. The same homeowners association that had been sending me letters for years telling me my fence was an eyesore, that my tractor was too loud, that the smell from my fields was negatively impacting property values. I'd ignored them all. Now they were here, on my land, acting like it belonged to them. I felt anger, sure, hot, sharp, buzzing under my skin, but underneath that was something colder, something steadier. They hadn't just crossed the line, they'd crossed into my world. And people who do that without respect usually don't understand the rules yet. I went back to the house and didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold in my hands, listening to the distant laughter and clinking bottles drifting up from the field. Every sound felt like an insult. By morning, I had a plan, though I didn't yet know all its steps. I walked down there just after sunrise, boots muddy, face calm. They were already up, stretching, chatting, acting like they owned the place. One man in a crisp polo shirt stepped forward, smile tight, eyes calculating. He told me they were holding a community retreat. He said it like that explained everything. I asked him who gave permission. He waved his hand vaguely and said something about easements and shared land and how it would all get sorted out later. Later. That word echoed in my head. I told him, politely, that this was my farm and they needed to leave. He laughed. Actually laughed. Said they'd be gone in a couple of days and not to make a fuss. Behind him, I saw one of them toss trash into the grass without looking. Another leaned against my fence like it was a prop. My hands clenched, but I smiled back. I told him to enjoy their stay. That smile confused him. I could see it. He didn't know yet that the rules were changing. The first night, I did nothing. I let them get comfortable. I let the sun set soft and pink, the breeze gentle, the insects quiet. I wanted them relaxed. I wanted them thinking they'd won. From my porch, I watched their campfire glow, heard their music. The first night I realized someone had pitched tents on my land, I was standing alone in the dark, with the smell of wet soil in my nose and a knot in my chest that told me this wasn't going to end quietly. The frogs had gone silent. Even the cows down by the south fence were restless, shifting their weight, lowing like they sensed what I didn't yet fully understand. Then I saw the flicker of lantern light where there should have been nothing but ryegrass and moonshine dew, and my stomach dropped. That land had been in my family longer than the town itself. No signs, no permission, just strangers sleeping where my father taught me to walk straight lines behind a plow. And in that moment I made myself a promise I didn't say out loud. They were going to regret choosing my farm. I didn't rush down there. That's the thing people get wrong about revenge. They think it's fast, explosive, loud. Real revenge is patient. It listens. I stood by the fence and watched. There were maybe a dozen tents, all neatly lined up like some kind of outdoor brochure. SUVs parked in a row, shiny, expensive, completely out of place in the mud. I recognized the decals right away. HOA. The same homeowners association that had been sending me letters for years telling me my fence was an eyesore, that my tractor was too loud, that the smell from my fields was negatively impacting property values. I'd ignored them all. Now they were here, on my land, acting like it belonged to them. I felt anger, sure, hot, sharp, buzzing under my skin, But underneath that was something colder, something steadier. They hadn't just crossed the line, they'd crossed into my world. And people who do that without respect usually don't understand the rules yet. I went back to the house and didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold in my hands, listening to the distant laughter and clinking bottles drifting up from the field. Every sound felt like an insult. By morning, I had a plan, though I didn't yet know all its steps. I walked down there just after sunrise, boots muddy, face calm. They were already up, stretching, chatting, acting like they owned the place. One man in a crisp polo shirt stepped forward, smile tight, eyes calculating. He told me they were holding a community retreat. He said it like that explained everything. I asked him who gave permission. He waved his hand vaguely and said something about easements and shared land and how it would all get sorted out later. Later. That word echoed in my head. I told him, politely, that this was my farm and they needed to leave. He laughed. Actually laughed. Said they'd be gone in a couple of days and not to make a fuss. Behind him, I saw one of them toss trash into the grass without looking. Another leaned against my fence like it was a prop. My hands clenched, but I smiled back. I told him to enjoy their stay. That smile confused him. I could see it. He didn't know yet that the rules were changing. The first night, I did nothing. I let them get comfortable. I let the sun set soft and pink, the breeze gentle, the insects quiet. I wanted them relaxed. I wanted them thinking they'd won. From my porch, I watched their campfire glow, heard their music float across the fields. I breathed deep and reminded myself this was my land, my time, my lesson to teach. The second night, I started small, just enough to make them uneasy. I turned on the old floodlights along the barn, the ones bright enough to turn night into something harsh and artificial. The light spilled across the field, bleaching the darkness, washing over their tents. I left them on, all night. I could hear voices rising, annoyed, confused. Someone shouted something I couldn't make out. I didn't respond. I sat in the dark on my side of the property, listening. Around midnight, I drove the tractor. Not toward them, just around the perimeter. Slow, steady. The engine's low growl rolled through the ground, through their sleep. I made wide circles, crushing nothing, touching no one, just reminding them where they were. When I shut it off at dawn, the silence felt thick and heavy, like a held breath. The third day, they were tense. You could see it in their shoulders, in the way they snapped at each other. The man in the polo came back up to my house, irritation barely contained. He complained about the lights, the noise, said they were disruptive. I looked at him and told him this was a working farm, that farms don't pause because someone wants a peaceful retreat. He threatened fines, legal action. I nodded, listened, and said nothing that mattered. That night, I introduced the smell. Now understand this, farms smell. That's not violence, that's life. I waited until the wind was just right, blowing steady from my fields toward their tents. Then I began spreading fertilizer on the far pasture, not near them, not on them, just enough. The rich, heavy scent of earth and livestock rolled out like a fog. It creeped, it lingered. I could hear gagging, coughing, angry shouts. Headlamps flicked on and off like fireflies. Someone retched. I stood at the edge of my land, hands in my pockets, heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to joy. By morning, some of them were gone. 2 tents vanished, a couple of SUVs rolled out early, tires spinning in the soft ground. The rest stayed. Pride is a powerful thing, especially in people who think they own everything. That's when I escalated, not with force, but with inevitability. I moved the cows. Cows are curious creatures, gentle and massive and completely uninterested in personal space. I opened the gates and let them wander closer, not into the camp, but near enough that their presence was unavoidable. They stared, they snorted, they shifted their weight and made the ground feel alive. The campers tried to shoo them away, waving arms, shouting. The cows didn't care. They never do. I stood from a distance, heart thudding with something that felt dangerously close to joy. That night, the insects came out in full force. Not because I released them, just because this is what happens when you camp on farmland in summer.
Lights attract bugs, warm bodies attract more. The campers zipped and unzipped tents, cursed, slapped at the air. I sat on my porch, listening to the chorus of nature reclaiming its space. By fifth day, they were exhausted, sleep-deprived, smelling of sweat and frustration. The man in the polo looked smaller somehow, his confidence leaking out with every complaint. He tried to rally them, to frame this as some kind of battle, but battles require belief, and belief was running thin. The final night, I didn't sleep at all. I waited until the moon was high and the field was quiet in that brittle way it gets before something breaks. Then I started the pump. Not near them, not touching them, just the steady mechanical heartbeat of farm work echoing through the dark. I let it run, and run, and run. Every time they thought it might stop, it didn't. The sound crawled into their heads, into their dreams, into whatever resolve they had left. Around 3 a.m., I heard someone crying.
I thought it was over when the last SUV vanished down the gravel road, but peace doesn't return all at once. It comes in pieces, and sometimes it tests you first. For 3 days after they left, I found signs of them everywhere. Tire ruts that cut too deep, a broken fence post shoved aside like it was nothing, cigarette butts crushed into the dirt where my grandfather once planted corn by hand. Every mark felt deliberate now, like a final insult. They didn't just trespass, they tried to erase me. On the 4th morning, I got the letter. No envelope, no stamp, just a folded piece of paper tucked into my mailbox like a threat that didn't want witnesses. HOA letterhead at the top, formal language, legal words meant to scare people who didn't know the land. It said they'd documented disturbances during their retreat, claimed I'd harassed them, said further action was under consideration. I laughed, a slow, hollow sound that surprised even me. They still thought this was about paperwork. That's when I realized they hadn't learned enough. They'd left the land, but the lesson hadn't followed them home yet. I didn't respond to the letter. Silence can be louder than any argument. Instead, I drove into town for the first time in weeks, parked across from the cafe where HOA members like to gather on weekends, all pressed shirts and self-importance. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my truck and watched. People talk, especially when they think they're safe. I heard my name more than once, heard the word farmer said like it was something dirty, heard them joke about smells and mud and how some people don't know their place. That old familiar heat flared in my chest again, but this time it didn't rush me, it focused me. They wanted control, image, comfort, so I took aim at exactly that. Over the next week, I did what I'd always done, worked my farm. But I did it loudly and proudly and precisely when it mattered most. Early mornings, late evenings, weekends. I followed every law, every rule, every line written down, but I used every inch of freedom those rules allowed. When they hosted outdoor meetings in their manicured lawns, the wind carried farm sounds their way. When they held open house events, the scent of real earth reminded them what existed beyond their fences. I rotated livestock near the property lines they shared with my fields, not crossing, not threatening, just existing. And existence to them felt like defiance. Then came the emails, complaints dressed up as concern, community well-being, quality of life. I archived every one, not for evidence, for memory. One night, long after the sun had set, I walked the same field where their tents had been. The grass was growing back uneven, stubborn. I knelt and pressed my palm into the soil. Cool, alive, patient. That's when I heard a car. Headlights swept across the far fence line, slow and deliberate, then stopped. I didn't move. A door opened, closed. Footsteps. Someone was on my land again. This time, I didn't wait. I stepped into the light just enough for my silhouette to be unmistakable. Didn't shout, didn't threaten. I simply stood there, boots planted, shoulders square, the farm behind me like a witness that never forgets. The man froze.
It was the same one, polo shirt, HOA confidence, thinner now. He started talking, said this didn't have to keep escalating, said we could come to an understanding. His voice cracked on the last word. I told him something simple, something true. I said, "You were guests who never asked, now you're trespassers who never learn." The wind picked up. Somewhere behind me a gate creaked. The dark pressed in, wide and endless and uninterested in his excuses. He left without another word. After that, things changed. The HOA backed off, slowly, quietly, like an animal that finally recognizes territory it shouldn't cross. The letters stopped. The looks in town shifted from smug to uncertain. People avoided my eyes, not because they hated me, but because they finally understood something about me. I wasn't loud. I wasn't cruel. I was rooted. Months passed. Seasons turned. The field healed. The farm breathed easier. And sometimes, late at night when the wind moves just right and the frogs sing again, I think about how close they came to taking something they didn't earn. They thought land was just land, but land remembers. And if you push it, if you push the people who belong to it, it doesn't fight back all at once. It waits. It surrounds you. It makes you uncomfortable until you leave on your own, carrying the lesson with you like a weight you can't put down. That's the kind of revenge that lasts.
I thought the tension would fade after that night at the fence, but instead it settled into something heavier, like humidity before a storm. You don't always hear trouble coming. Sometimes you feel it in the way the air refuses to move. A week later, the rumors started. It began quietly. A clerk at the feed store hesitated before ringing me up. A neighbor who used to wave didn't. At the cafe, conversations dipped when I walked in, like someone had turned down the volume just enough to be obvious. I didn't need to ask why. I already knew. The HOA had shifted tactics. If they couldn't scare me off my land, they'd try to turn the town against me. They painted me as difficult, uncooperative, a problem. Said I'd terrorized a peaceful retreat. Said I was unstable, dangerous. That word followed me like a shadow, even though no one could point to a single thing I'd done wrong. That's the kind of pressure that gets to you if you let it. It works on people who need approval. I'd grown up learning how to stand alone in a field with nothing but weather and work for company. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. One evening, I found my gate open. Not broken, not forced, just open. My chest tightened as I walked the fence line, every sense sharpened. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed, which somehow made it worse. It was a message. We can reach you. We can cross lines, too. I closed the gate slowly and stood there until the sun dropped below the trees. Anger buzzed under my skin, but I didn't let it drive me. I knew better by now. Every move mattered. That night, I didn't retaliate. I documented, not with papers or cameras, but with memory, times, sounds, faces, patterns. You learn those things when you work land long enough. You learn when something doesn't belong. 2 nights later, headlights appeared again near the far road. This time, they didn't stop. They passed slowly, almost ceremonially, like a parade meant for one audience. Then again, an hour later, and again just before dawn. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams felt thin and sharp. By morning, I was tired in a way that went past my bones. That's when I decided to end it. Not with force, not with threats, but with clarity. I spent the next few days preparing, doing what I always did, but with intention layered into every step. I repaired the fence fully, stronger than before. I posted clear, legal signage where there had been none, not aggressive, just unmistakable. I adjusted routines so that my presence was constant, predictable, impossible to ignore. And then I waited. The HOA held a meeting the following Saturday, not on my land, close enough to feel bold. I didn't attend. I didn't need to.
By then, they were unraveling themselves. People who thrive on control panic when it slips away, and panic makes noise. That night, the wind shifted again. I was out near the barn when I heard voices drifting across the field, whispered, nervous, not confident enough to be angry anymore. I followed the sound at a distance, staying in shadow, letting them reveal themselves. 3 of them, flashlights low, shoes already caked with mud they clearly weren't used to. They argued in hushed tones about boundaries, about whether this was worth it, about how things had gone too far. They were right, just not in the way they thought. I stepped into view, far enough away to keep space, close enough to be unmistakable. I didn't raise my voice, didn't move toward them. I said, "This ends tonight." One of them dropped his flashlight. Another swore under his breath. The third, the one who'd never stopped pretending he was in charge, asked what I meant. I told them the truth, that the land didn't want them, that the town was already tired of the drama, and that every time they pushed, they only made themselves smaller, and that I wasn't going anywhere. Silence stretched, long, uncomfortable, honest. They left without another word, boots slipping, pride finally cracking under the weight of reality. After that, the rumors died the way fires do when they run out of fuel, slowly, uneventfully. People stopped avoiding my eyes. A few even nodded again. The clerk at the feed store smiled like nothing had ever been wrong. The HOA never contacted me again. Months later, standing in the same field where the tents once stood, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore, not even a little. The land had absorbed it, filtered it, turned it into something quieter. Peace, I learned, isn't about winning loudly. It's about standing firm long enough that the noise gives up. And on my farm, with the wind moving through the grass the way it always has, the silence felt earned. For a while, I believed that was the end of it, that the silence meant surrender. But silence can be a strategy too, and the people who crave control don't give it up easily. They just wait for you to stop watching. Autumn came in slow and gold, painting the fields in colors that made the land look softer than it really was. The work changed with the season. Longer mornings, shorter light, more time alone. That's when the unease crept back in, subtle as a chill you can't quite shake. It started with the road. Fresh gravel appeared one morning along the edge of my property. No notice, no conversation, just progress, apparently. I knew who'd pushed for it. They said it was for community access. Funny how access always seems to point towards someone else's land. I watched the trucks from a distance, memorized the rhythm of their work. They didn't cross the line, but they hovered near it, like they wanted me to react. I didn't. Reaction is what they fed on. Instead, I adapted. I shifted equipment routes, changed grazing patterns, made sure my presence was always visible, calm and unbothered. That's when the town started asking questions. Not the official kind, the quiet kind. Neighbors stopped by under the excuse of borrowed tools or idle conversation. They asked how things were going, asked what really happened that summer. I didn't embellish. I didn't complain. I told the truth, plain and steady, and let it sit where it landed. Truth has weight when you don't dress it up. One evening, just as dusk folded into night, I heard music again, distant, faint, familiar in the worst way. I climbed the rise near the oak and saw a small gathering near the new gravel stretch. Not tents this time, folding chairs, a cooler, a fire pit that hadn't been there before. They were testing me. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling my pulse in my ears. This was the moment they expected me to break, to charge down and shout, to give them the story they wanted to tell about me. Instead, I did something else. I lit the field. Not with flames, but with work. Tractors moved, gates opened and closed. Lights came on across the farm in a pattern that said one thing clearly: this place is alive and it is not yours. The sounds rolled out across the land, steady and purposeful, not aggressive, unignorable. The music stopped. I didn't go closer. I didn't look their way. I just kept working until the cold bit through my jacket and the stars burned sharp overhead. When I finally shut everything down, the gathering was gone. Chairs folded, fire cold, the gravel empty again. The next day, someone left a note on my fence. No threats, no signatures, just a single sentence written in careful block letters. You made your point. I stared at it for a long time before folding it and slipping it into my pocket. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Winter came hard that year. Snow buried the scars in the field, softened the edges of everything. The farm slept, and so did the conflict. I worked, ate, slept, and let the cold burn away what little tension remained. By spring, the HOA had new leadership, younger, quieter, smarter. They didn't reach out, didn't test boundaries. They learned from the mistakes of the ones before them, and that might have been the most satisfying part of all. On the first warm night of the season, I walked the perimeter one last time. Frogs sang, the air smelled clean, the land felt settled, like it had finally unclenched. I realized then that revenge wasn't what I had carried out, not really. What I had done was refuse to disappear, refuse to be small, refuse to let someone else decide the value of what I'd inherited and worked for. And that kind of refusal changes things. It changes how people look at you. It changes how they speak your name. It changes where they choose to set their tents. I went back to the house as the moon rose, boots muddy, shoulders tired, my heart quiet. Behind me, the farm stretched out, dark and watchful, and finally, undeniably mine.